assume that assume that the person, is evaluated and said, I understand that it's a different skill set, and I want to take the opportunity to kind of grow and develop that skill set. How do they make that transition? What is that first? How do you get that first leadership role? Like, what are the things that they can be doing to work on today, or to stand out to find that leadership role? Because that
Yeah.
maybe that first one is hard, is the hardest,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Might be. The last one, which might be like a C level, VP of IT or CIO or CTO or something like that. That's probably harder because there's less of those. So I think it depends a lot. Like if you're at an organization, it's going to depend a lot on your organizational culture, right? Because I worked at a government institution where everything was super prescribed. And what they said was the only way you're going to get a promotion is if somebody dies and then that position opens up. Well, we had like 3 people die and the positions never opened up, right? So at that organization, you just couldn't move into management. I actually left from there. I was not in technology, but I left from there and I went over to my first technology role. And so there was something really interesting that I learned. So there was a guy that sat a few cubicles away from me, and he was really fun and fun to chat with and stuff like that. And he was, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years ahead of us, the interns that were there. And he said, what's interesting is if you get on full time here, you will always be Jason the intern, because that's how you came here. That's how we know you. And people will talk about you for years, even after you get on full time. He said the only way to get around that is to go to another organization for a year or two and then come back if you want. And then you won't be Jason the intern anymore. That was a cultural nuance that was at that organization, right? So I think the last company that I worked for, which built HRIS systems, they had an amazing culture. And I think if I wanted to be a manager in that organization, we had weekly one-on-ones. Everybody had weekly one-on-ones with their boss for an hour. Like this was a big deal in
Wow.
this organization. I think that I would go to my boss and say, hey, I want a management role. I want a fast track, or I want a path to leadership. So can you help me get there? What is that path? And that conversation would have gone really well in that organization, right? So on one end of the spectrum, you have the government, big institution, unbending. And then on the other hand, you have these organizations that are really big on like culture and a lot more flexible. So the answer really depends on where you're at in those. But let's switch gears a little bit and say you're in a job search, like you're completely open to going somewhere else. One of the things that I tell people in job search is too often we make our resumes or CVs or LinkedIn profiles or whatever, we make them backwards facing. We talk about what we used to do, what we did, like what's the path that got us to where we are. And I say, or actually, I think I heard this phrase, your resume is not your obituary. We don't
That's
have to
good.
have, it is an excellent phrase. We don't have to have our marketing asset, okay, whether it's resume, CV, LinkedIn, whatever. We don't have to have our marketing asset backward facing like an obituary, like, well, Jason did this and Jason did that. And, instead, what I want you to think about is your resume or your marketing asset as a forward facing marketing document, right? And so instead of saying, I did this, I did this, I did this, I want you to say, if you're looking at a management role, say, I can do this. I have this characteristic. And here's here's what people say about me, or here's an example of when I use this characteristic. And so you can talk about managing people, and you can talk about listening skills and communication skills and negotiation and all the different things that you think go into that management role, right? And then figure out those characteristics and then put some meat behind them. Like talk about how you actually do those things. Those are the thing. That's the way that you position yourself as, yeah, you need these 5 characteristics. Well, I have them, and here's some proof. Like here's some evidence. So the only other thing I would say is, if you really want to become a manager or a leader, you need to start getting mentors, and they don't have to be like official like handshake relationships or contractual relationships. I have mentors that didn't even know they were my mentors, but I listened and I learned a lot from these people, right? So But I would definitely try and sit down with people and say, hey, here's where I want to be. You've had the career that I'd like to have. What do you advise me to do? Like, who should I talk to and how should I approach this? And what should I do as far as like education or certifications or any kind of quantification?